Thank you, Doc. Okay, since we have only 10 minutes, let me go straight to the number one questions that we asked in this paper. How the progress thinking domains like theologies of liberation become a highly academic enterprise or an abstract theological discourse. In 2018, the British weekly newspaper published a short article titled, "What Happened to Liberation Theology?" This article provides the origins of liberation theology movement, and the unnamed author outlines some reasons for the decrease of the influence of liberation theology within the Catholic community. In reaction, scholars, particularly liberation theologians, argue that liberation theology movement is bigger than the Catholic Church. However, there is a need to admit or acknowledge these changes or declines, if you say so. In fact, according to John Frederick Swaller and Joseph Esterman, theologies of liberation have declined and changed in past 55 years. In their article titled "The Decline of Liberation Theology," especially in the history of the Catholic Church in Latin America, these changes or declines are also visible to other people or faith traditions. Many Christian scholars, for instance, Pentecostal theologians, have popularized their counter-critique of the distinguished concept of Latin American theology, preferential option for the poor. As liberation theologian advancing and advocating the rights of the poor and vulnerable, according to Mark J. Cartledge, the poor opted for neo-Pentecostalism, or to be exact, liberation theology opted for the poor, and the poor opted for neo-Pentecostalism. On one level, this is not surprising, according to the Swiss philosopher and theologian Joseph Esterman, who has worked for many years in the ISET in La Paz, Bolivia, because theologies of liberation become a highly academic enterprise or an abstract theological discourse, especially in various Western universities and seminaries. In his book titled "Poverty, Migration, and Eurocentrism: Challenges for a Genuine European Liberation Theology in the 21st Century," published in 2017, Esterman vigorously attacked the discrepancy of academic theology and the socio-political context that had abandoned the emancipatory ideas, for example, the political and economic critical or analysis of liberation theology. For some, for instance, non-organic European academic theologians, as Esterman observed, view theologies of liberation as antiquated, or another way of doing contextual theology that reduced into process-oriented theological thinking, or a body of collections of information that were adapted to reality. Aside from this, Esterman sought to address the questions concerning the current theological method with respect to European way of doing liberation theologies. He emphasizes the importance of critically reflecting on how theologies of liberation were formulated. For him, it must ensure that formulating theologies of liberation or liberative theological reflection is grounded in concrete socio-political reality. In this context, theology of liberation reflections are born in the struggles against oppressions, neoliberal capitalism or market-oriented policies, neocolonialism, unjust distribution of wealth, patriarchy, structural racism, structural poverty, white supremacy, Zionism, authoritarianism, populism, and permanent war, etc., etc. However, if non-organic liberation theologians detached from the ground reality, the theologies of liberation remains a highly academic discourse and not turned into praxis as people never before seen. For example, the global refugee crisis, proxy wars, and the outbreak of COVID-19, the brutal and dark world is waiting for the next generation. The second question, which themes of theologies of liberations are still relevant today for formulating theological reflections, especially from non-Western perspectives? To acknowledge now that the theologies of liberation is obsolete appears, however, somewhat premature and seems to neglect the potential power and significance of the critical ideas forwarded by Gustavo Gutierrez, Leonardo Boff, Juan Luis Segundo, and Jun Sobrino, which have, after all, shaped the 20th century global Christian theological thinking significantly. It is the most fearless and intellectually rigorous theological critique of the evil of the neoliberal ideology. It attempts to unmask and deconstruct the motives that underlie its governing ideology. In many ways, liberation theology has still much to offer, and it has so much potential that has yet to be tapped. In the light of it becoming simply a theoretical and academic enterprise, a slight nudge or redirection toward praxis is needed for liberation theologies to actualize and reactualize its diminishing potentials. With the emerging of and murking social political injustices at present, now is not the time to abandon the path guided by theologies of liberation. Therefore, there seems to be a good reason to reimagine, liberating, and re-embracing theologies of liberation today. But the crucial question at this point is which theologies of liberation are still relevant today for formulating theological reflection, especially from non-Western perspective. First, the first relevant theme is the fundamental questions is for whom, doing liberation theology, theological reflection, the question is for whom and for what? While debating and defining the object and the subject of theologies of liberation, various self-confessed liberation theologians contend that primarily the objective of theologies of liberation is the human ecological emancipation, and the subject is the oppressed and marginalized people. This is encapsulated the popular slogan, preferential option of the poor. The second theme, although is often claimed that it is overarching theological approach or method, but effective theologies of liberation provides a critical, systematic, and systemic theological approach to reflect on human predicament, also known as the concept of pastoral cycle or circle of praxis. Human experience or contemporary challenges, then scripture or Judeo-Christian tradition, church tradition, either that is Wesleyan, Lutheran, Calvinist, or Catholic, Anglican, or Orthodox, or Pentecostal. Then the third relevant theme is theologies of liberation offer an integrative analysis. Far from collapsing, global economic system was being shored up in Western and non-Western states, like, for example, China and Japan, undertook significant political, social, economic reforms to maintain its imperialistic economic policies and militaristic projects. Theologies of liberation offer a holistic and integrative analysis of the rapid and disorienting political, social, and technological and ecological changes. The fourth relevant theme, theologies of liberation give up importance to the class analysis. One of the remain committed to the importance of the concept of class analysis or social class analysis is Professor Joe Ridger, not to mention Marvin G. Dunn and Nestor O. Miguez. In his edited book titled Religion, Theology, and Class, Fresh Engagement After Long Silence, Ridger argues that scholars can no longer do without class or social class analysis in religious studies and theology. Not in the traditional sense, of course, which is the economic deterministic interpretation of class analysis. Accordingly, class analysis remains meaningful when attending the economic dimensions, primarily even while intersectional realities like the issue of power, race, gender, education, etc. must keep in view. Lastly, Theologies of Liberation fostered the popular motto of the Protestant Reformation, that is Reformata Semper Reformanda. The Reformed Church should always be reformed, or the Reformed always reforming. Anchored by this conviction, Theologies of Liberation nurture and celebrates the diversity of liberative emancipatory theological expressions. In fact, Asian Theologies of Liberation paved the way for the emergence of various non-Western theologies, for example, post-colonial and decolonial theologies. Hence, Theologies of Liberation defy a literalistic, universalistic, or essentialist mode of theological thinking, which seeks to preserve and promote static, timeless faith, which is applicable in all contexts for all time. And in conclusion, Glovedi.
Hi, you need to wrap it up.
Okay, in conclusion, today we can observe that many self-confessed liberation theologians neglected or avoided the political economic aspect of doing liberative theological thinking that is resulted into one-dimensional mode of theological reflection. Many scholars argue that this was a fatal flaw, as well as the massive error of progressive movements claiming to work in the name of liberative theologies. And let me end on that one sentence. Thank you very much.
Then also with Hadje, as he explored, Hadje and Glovedi, as they explore the liberation theology question, I was thinking that this is always a problem, because what's the word I want to say? All liberation theology endeavors or enterprises eventually fall into the wrong hands. Maybe not necessarily into the wrong hands, because it is our hands. We can't be the ones who come up with these, but eventually we tame them, or they become tame, and as they rightly put it, they become, it's just some intellectual exercises. There's no praxis. And I think that comes again from being part of this machine, where I'm looking for my space, I find it, I hold on. And there's an illusion, I would say, of thinking that we build something and leave something. And I think we have an obsession. I think this goes back to Lily's paper. I think we have an obsession of building structures that last. But the earth itself is not like that. I think the earth destroys. There are termites, there's floods that come, that's how the rhythm goes. But for us, we want to find a space and fix it, and we do it, I think, even in our theologies, and in the end, we leave out maybe the people that should be benefiting from that. So in the end, there's no liberation. There's enslavement, I think, more voluntary enslavement for us, and maybe those sometimes who are relying on us. I think I'll stop it there. I hope that makes sense. But I didn't ask Hadje a question, but I don't know, maybe he answered it already. What's the solution? I know we can say, let's keep doing theology again and again, but is there more on have you, and Glovedi, have you thought of ways of doing that, of keeping the enterprise going and not having it stop? Thank you.
Thank you, Shingi.